And thank you to our listeners for joining us in this webinar. I will start with Dr. Nibigira's um, profile. So Dr. Nibigira is a seasoned tourism policy analyst with over 20 years experience in the hotel and tourism industry in Africa and Europe. Carmen is a dynamic business leader with an international track record of delivering significant results in a variety of difficult, volatile markets. With extensive experience and deep domain expertise in the tourism industry, that is destination management and tourism policy, cross-regional consultancy, and most recently, tertiary education. She is driven by her passion to catalyze change, initiate and oversee transformation, and a deep desire to serve. She's an expert in pulling together strategic frameworks, building coalitions, fostering innovation, and through lobbying, advocacy, and communication, driving substantial policy changes. Most of her development work and consultancy has been in emerging destination and fragile states. Carmen has worked in different capacities as advisor to tourism boards, international and private organizations in East, Central, and Western parts of Africa. Carmen was awarded the African Woman in Tech in Tourism Leadership Award in 2018 and was voted as one of the top 100 influential women in travel in 2017. She is widely known for her courageous advocacy of quality education and social economic empowerment for women. She is the chair of the Rwanda Board of Directors of Davis College and East African Higher Education Institute. She also serves on the advisory board of Inkomoko, a business incubator in East Africa, an outlet for her interest in entrepreneurship. Her PhD from Clemson University in the United States was in parks, recreation, and tourism management. Her area of specialism was policy and political economy of tourism, as well as social political fabric of emerging tourism destinations. Her most recent areas of interest have been how to migrate businesses and institutions up from the value chain by instilling a commitment throughout the culture of the enterprise to optimizing customer experience. Her doctorate builds on her bachelor's degree and master's, both successfully completed from her time living in the United Kingdom. Carmen has what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. She is always pushing herself to learn more, widening her horizons through being an avid reader and a dedicated mentor to young people. And now I'll hand over to Dr. Alex Awiti for an introduction to our conversation. Alex.
Thank you very much, Juki. Thanks, Gitonga. And Carmen, good afternoon. And we're so delighted to have you on this webinar conversation today and to speak about a topic that is not only your passion, but where you have had significant contribution, not just in your country, Burundi, but in Rwanda, in Kenya, and Uganda, and Tanzania as well. So this is a very interesting time to have this conversation. The main driver of tourism in East Africa and in Africa, as we know it, is foreign revenues that come from people who come on aircrafts. Airlines, according to the Airport Council International, predicts a reduction of about 4.6 billion passengers in 2020. Decline of total airport revenues is estimated about 97 billion in 2020. And what we're seeing is that airlines are expected to see a full year passenger revenue fall by 252 billion. So what we understand from this is that it's going to cascade into hospitality. It's going to get into the hotel sector. And that means that arrivals are going to decline. That means that parks are going to get less revenue. That means our tourism revenue model is at best in jeopardy. So what we want to explore with you today is this the end of foreign-based markets for tourism in our part of the world? And if not so, how do you see our countries remodel, reorganize their businesses, and reset the button to begin to look at more homegrown tourism? Here in East Africa, at some point, we're going to open restrictions. We still can travel by land borders. Is this an opportunity for us to think differently about regional integration? And how about all the conversations in the past about the airspace, for instance, about removing travel restrictions across the continent so Africans can travel more easily? Is this a time for us to look inward as a basis for trying to deal with this situation? So we will open it up for you to have a 20 to 30-minute conversation with us, and then we'll start to take questions, and then we'll get you to engage with our listeners and viewers from across our regions. So thank you very much, and with that, Dr. Nibigira, I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Alex Awiti. Good afternoon from the beautiful mountains of Kigali in Rwanda. I'm delighted to be with you today, and then also I'll take this opportunity to thank the Aga Khan Academy and all the community around it to open this floor to discuss about tourism. I've followed your previous webinars. I think it's important that we talk about tourism in the East African context. You are right, Alex. This is a crisis. I think the COVID-19 pandemic is a once in a lifetime experience for everyone. I think on the planet Earth, there has never been an event in the recorded history of modern humankind that has actually affected everyone the same as COVID-19 has done. So this crisis by no means new to tourism. If in my recent memory as a Carmen who's been working in the industry for the last 20 years, I'll say between 2000 and 2015, major disruptive events took place, starting from September 11th in 2001 in the United States, which changed the way we travel in terms of security and safety around the airport and travel using aircraft airlines. And also we saw the severe acute respiratory syndrome SARS outbreak in 2003. And then also the tsunami in 2004 around the Indian Ocean and the earthquake, which was a travel, but it didn't happen the way COVID has actually shaken us up. The outbreak of Ebola from 2014 in Western Africa, and then closer to home, Uganda and DRC is still a major issue. But also we look at the global economic crisis of 2008 and 2009, and then the 2015 Middle East also outbreak. None of them led to a longer term decline in the regional development of tourism, or even global outbreak. And some did not even have a significant impact on how we define and we look at tourism and travel and hospitality. So we need to think the relationship between pandemics and travel and tourism are almost like central to understanding also other issues, health and safety, security, and global change. So if we look closer to home in the East African community, beside what I have mentioned, 2001, 11th September, and so on and on, we look at all at the regional scale, several terrorist attacks in Kenya. Every 5 years in East African community, we have election which puts things on hold. So this will have suggested that the tourism as a system has been resilient to external shocks. However, there's so much evidence that the impact of recovery from the COVID-19 is something which has not been seen before. So when we want to talk about tourism and travel and hospitality, we need to look at it from a global perspective and think, how do we reset the button? The virus has given us a picture, a frightening one, but also a beautiful one. We saw a world without tourism. The first time all the major in Florida, in Paris, casinos in Las Vegas, the beautiful beaches in Mombasa, in Diani, Watamu, you know, the national parks of the gorillas in Rwanda closed for the first time for more than 3 or 4 months. So we have never seen anything like that. But at the same time, we saw open spaces nature thriving, less emission of CO2 because industry were closed. So it's harder to imagine a better illustration of tourism effects than our current holiday away from home from everything we have seen. So coronavirus has actually, I would say, revealed the danger of over-reliance on tourism, once again demonstrating a brutal fashion what happens when the industry supporting an entire community, an entire village, an entire district, an entire country and the region at the expense of other more sustainable activities collapses or happens. Just to give you numbers, last month, actually May, or gave estimate numbers, what we have now as a crisis in terms of economic, socioeconomic gains. So international tourism may be down to 80% this year against the same figures of 1.7 trillion. And then loss of 120 million jobs could be lost worldwide. So since tourism relies on the same human mobility that spread the disease and the virus, and they will be subject to the most stringent and lasting restrictions, it's likely that, destinations like ours in East African community around Africa are going to be suffering. So the UNWTO projects that 20 to 30% decline in revenue, and we are talking about 400 to 450 billions of US dollars going to be lost. So can you imagine what that has an impact for small businesses, hotels, restaurants, food production, telecom, banking sector, every step of the whole ecosystem supporting the tourism sector and the travel industry. So it's not a crisis we have seen before, but what is different, I think, for me, is how this, I don't think in January, anyone in the industry of travel and tourism hospitality have ever thought we would see something like this on the 23rd of June, 2020. So this has a very significant on all the stimulus, the policies, whether it's fiscal monetary program we are seeing in place in some destination. And then the question we need to ask is how are we going to bounce back? How can we reset the industry? As tourism impact on the world has deepened and the global economy has once again seen how this sector is very important. Before, people didn't really understand how tourism was very much integrated into every sphere of our lives. It's not just about agriculture, because we have to eat. It's the financial sector, the telecom, manufacturing, name it, tourism is everywhere. So we needed to have a new conversation, Alex, as you just mentioned. And then this is not going to be something we are to have as only as one in the industry. We need to broaden this conversation to a larger extent.
Okay. Are you ready for questions now, or are you going to still?
No, I wanted to see if you want me to continue, because I have so much to talk about tourism, really.
Yeah, well, you still have another 10 minutes.
Okay, well, I thought it was going to be like an interaction. You probably prompt some questions. Maybe what I would like to say, Alex, is that tourism is about movement of people, and then without mobility, really, there's no tourism. And given the prospect of future pandemics, I think COVID-19 is one, and then I have no doubt we are going to see more, and there's no reason to reconsider the global economic value chains without talking about tourism. COVID-19 should lead us to critically reconsider the global volume growth model for tourism we believed was the best model we used. For instance, our metrics of success in tourism has always been how many tourists, the number of tourists we have, revenue collected from tourism, and the more the merrier. That was the slogan. You know, how many tourists, how many aircraft, how many airlines, how many charter flights. The more we were in the more. But this perspective, in my view, is outdated. And the volume growth agenda in some emerging destinations in Africa, I'll say, will have to be changed seriously, because we are called to reconsider tourism growth trajectory and to question the logic of more arrivals as the best indicator for tourism success. Because more arrivals does not necessarily imply greater benefits to our communities. It doesn't mean that people have better jobs, significant jobs, revenue, and have an impact on their societies and communities where they live. So as we understand today, everyone on the planet, again, at varying degrees, is experiencing lockdown, has experienced lockdown or quarantine in some degrees, which I think for us is essential to operators in tourism and hospitality to understand that people's perception of travel has changed. And we have to look at new ways of bringing confidence to tourists, whether the local tourists, the regional tourists, those coming from the African continent and outside. You know, safety is important, comfort is important, resilience is important. And what is the relationship between people and place has been really at the center of the conversation we are going to have. And then about the meaning of life in general. In the lockdown, all of us, we try to think what life is in our own space. Comfort at home became very important. We try to buy our bread closer to home, and we were content with what we had. So how can we rephrase, reshape, redesign tourism when people have different expectations? Because we know travel and tourism experiences are essentially and especially well suited to encourage such deep thinking, searching, and then transformative experiences. And COVID is a catalyst, in my view, to reiterate such important aspects of our lives and values. So how are we going to sell the Masai Mara experience? I think from a product development perspective, something has to be changed. And social distancing is going to be becoming something we do, whether we like it or not, for our own sake and our own safety. But at the same time, we are interesting creatures. We want to be part of a community. We want to be together. How are we going to balance those things? I don't know. And you alluded to something which is important, Alex, I would like maybe to mention, is that from a regional perspective, I think if you look at all the 5 East African countries, including South Sudan, 6 countries, not all of us behave the same way, the way we handle this crisis. So are we going to see new ways of dealing with our neighbors from a geopolitical standpoint? Do we close our borders to those who misbehave? Because contamination has a high cost. But at the same time, we want to see regional tourism. The more you open it, the threats that becomes. So the disease, the COVID and the pandemics and then everything else brings new discussions we didn't take into account a few months ago. And then, you know, whether you are a practitioner or hotel owner or restaurant manager, or even a policymaker or tourism board, we needed to have a totally different discussion at the East African community, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And this fault could change our policy response to the crisis and the tourism development in the East African community. So the fundamentals of tourism, the way we knew it before COVID, may be disputable right now, and then we cannot fix a system if we don't know how we want to do it, or are we willing to learn how to do it? And the main reason for us to look at solutions, because we know the benefits of tourism, but that has to become a political agenda, a goodwill, and then the business community to elevate the conversation to another level. So I will say that at the East African community, we needed to have a new conversation. because you cannot sell Kenya alone and then say post-COVID or post-lockdown, you would choose only to sell Kenya to Rwanda or Uganda or South Sudan, DRC or other countries. But you also have to understand, where is KQ going to fly? When the flight come back, is it going to come with the threats? Are we going to have issues of dealing with all those uncertainties we have and we have to take into account? Maybe let me just put things into context, because you are in Kenya. The damage done by the collapse of the whole tourism industry in Kenya, we are talking about 1.6 billion of revenue from tourism, which we are not going to generate this year. And then that deficit is going to be felt somewhere. 1.6 million employed in tourism, hospitality, and travel in Kenya are either layoff, there's no salary, there's a loss of income. What that implication has. So the loss of incomes caused by the pandemic may yet precipitate disaster. It's not just the COVID June today, but what will be the consequences? Because the recovery may take a year and a half. I would like to quote what the Minister of Tourism, Honorable Najib Balala, said, that we have to do a paradigm shift in favor of domestic and Pan-African tourism. I believe it's no longer about waiting for international tourists only. It's about a paradigm shift. It's about a paradigm reset tourism. Look at how we do things differently. We have relied so much on international tourism. And then these are the source markets feeling the pinch today, whether they're Italians. I'm talking about those who are on the coasts of Kenya, Malindi, Watamu. This is the Italian, I would say, destination. The British, the Americans, the Chinese. How are we going to start having a conversation about redesigning tourism in the East African community? It will have to be an interesting aspect, I would say. So maybe to kind of like reiterate that the change to tourism will need more than what we call cosmetic surgery. It has to be deep tissue work, and the business can no longer be as usual. And then the question we need to ask, what the foundation of this tourism will look like in regard to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, creation of wealth, redistribution, equity, women, youth, small SMEs, and then also the environmental aspects, which I think tourism didn't do well in the past, but now we know that we cannot get away with it. It has to be part of what we do as we find solutions.
Okay, excellent. So just a quick kind of comment to get us started as we get the questions coming. We've seen tourists returning to Spain, and tourism dollars and contributes about 12% to Spanish GDP. And, you know, unlike best practice, whatever might start to materialize best practice, the Spanish government is saying that for Britons who are going into Spain, they will not quarantine for 14 days. They can get off the planes and go to the beaches. And they've got a huge campaign called Spain for Sure. I'm just wondering, you know, from a policy and recovery perspective, are our governments preparing for what's going to happen to an industry that is on its knees now in a deliberate way to suggest that our countries are open for business? You know, Rwanda goes a great length to advertise gorilla safaris and all of that. Kenya is the destination. But right now, all of these things have shut down. We don't see any ads on CNN anymore about tourism and this being the preferred destination. What are our governments doing now, in your view, to prepare for when we might return to some kind of state, which is with COVID, but basically trying to figure out how best tourism can work? You talked about the behavior across, personal behavior across East Africa, where some countries are not declaring the numbers. We don't know the state of COVID infections. Rwanda is pretty tightly held down by the president, and so is Uganda, for instance. Tanzania is whatever you want to call it. Kenya is somewhere in between. So will there be trust in the EAC for travel, especially when we want to leverage local travel to start driving tourism and show the world that we are safe and they should come?
Thank you, Alex. As the case of Spain opening their tourism for obvious, because 12% above for GDP contribution, that's quite an interesting number. And then Spain is known for a destination which, in my view, the bread and butter, specifically for June, July, August, and September, is about tourism. So maybe to answer your question, I will say, what is the new normal? Because the new normal can no longer be that I open my borders and then I allow anyone to come in. Because the tourist bubble has busted. We cannot just open the borders and say, do we trust our neighbors to come in? But also we have to look at what is the cost of opening the borders. The policymakers, our governments must ensure the safety of citizens, plus the business to continue to thrive. So how do you balance those two things in reopening your borders, trading, and taking a leap of faith and say, we are going to open and monitor? I would say, from my own perspective, that some destinations will open faster than others, but they will have to put measures in place. And then those measures is what I am still yet to see on the African continent. I think Spain and Great Britain, when it comes to their healthcare, I would say they could be at par. But if you put Burundi and Kenya on the same scale, would you open your borders now and say, what will happen? So tourism is about mobility. You cannot stop people moving, and then maybe they move with the viruses. The touch point is from the airport to the taxi driver, to the restaurant, to the hotel, to the museum, to the business center, to the conference center. So it's very much a geopolitical crisis we have to deal with. And then it's going to put at taste, actually, the EAC integration, I would say, because we have to look at ourselves and say, are we willing to take that threat and then go back to the lockdown? And then we know the cost of lockdown to our economies. I would say Spain and Great Britain are probably outliers. In this case, we just need to be cautious, because it's not just about opening, it's all the risks which are associated with it.
Thank you. Njoki, please.
Right, thank you, Dr. Carmen, for that. So there is a question here from Nora Matheka, who is asking, what measures have hotels put in place to deal with the situation? Is there a change in how hotels and tourist destinations are putting in place to rise from this COVID crisis? Because the current discussion seems to really spell out the problems that tourism is facing. But I think the main question that the audience want to understand is that, is there hope? Are there any measures that are being put in place to inject life back to the industry?
Thank you so much for your question. I think I'm just talking about Rwanda, where I am now physically. All the businesses are actually opened. No, not all. Many businesses opened are now following the government guidelines given by the UN World Health Organization, plus the Ministry of Health in the country. So washing hands and 1 meter distance. So those are the normal principles and things we are start to see everywhere. Everybody's trying to. However, we are still in the lockdown in Rwanda. Imagine tomorrow you have to allow from your national carrier, your borders are open, people are coming from all over the world, from China to Nairobi, from Nairobi to Joburg, Cape Town. And then they have to come to Rwanda for any reasons related to tourism or travel or any other purposes. So therefore, we needed to understand that we cannot continue closing the borders. But what we call the new normal is what we have to agree upon, all of us, in terms of protocols. What is the tipping point when we say this is not working and we need to go back to a new formula? I think we are still in the try and error exercise. We will see what Spain does in a 1 week or 2 weeks when all the British tourists flood all the Malaga and then all the nice hotel hotspots tourism they have. What this will look like? What are going to be the ways they put in place for smooth transition of people from airport to hotels? So I think we are all learning. There's no such thing as a prescribed menu or recipe. We are all going to learn as we open slowly. So it's not just about hotels and restaurants, and it's everyone involved in the tourism and hospitality sector in East Africa and beyond.
So there's another question here from Joyce. She's talking about domestic tourism and the fact that it almost comes like an afterthought. After the international tourists have failed to come, then we can ask our citizens to please support the tourism industry. And also there's a question of attitude and so many other compounding factors. She's asking what can be done to change this and encourage more focus on local tourism as a worthwhile source of revenue for hospitality and tourism industries, and one worth pursuing, because the focus mostly before has been on international tourism.
Yes, you are right. Pretty much all the East African destinations, starting from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, the source markets, which brings a lot of revenue, is always the Western market. But now by default, not by design really, we need to think about domestic tourism. But domestic tourism is a very interesting way of looking at in terms of recovery. Domestic tourism depends on several factors. You have to take into account the purchasing power. Currently now, I doubt that the confidence of people to spend money when we are facing an economic crisis, people will be willing to spend money on what I would call maybe even the disposable income. There's another factor of product. There has to always be, in economic terms, the supply and the demand. On the demand side, maybe what is available on the markets is not always what the local market and the domestic market is looking for. And I will say with confidence that our governments, our tourism board, have done not really much in terms of promoting domestic tourism. Probably at the exception of Kenya, because of your historical past of facing challenges where you have to rely on your domestic market. But in other destinations across Africa, domestic tourism was never a priority. So if domestic tourism is what everybody is looking at as the savior, as a solution, this will take years. Domestic tourism, the same way we have done to attract the Western market, we need to do market research. We need to spend a significant budget on marketing, branding, product development, and educate people about domestic tourism. There's an assumption that the domestic tourism will happen. Anyway, it will happen. It doesn't happen like that. It takes time. And for inter and intra-regional tourism, there's aspect of access. On the Pan-African continent, we know it's still expensive to travel within the continent. The air tickets are, I would say, out of reach to many. And the visa restrictions, open sky policies. To travel from here to Togo, I have to go via Addis Ababa to Accra, Accra to Lome. But I always get a flight from here to Brussels directly. So we needed to think about domestic tourism as a long-term investment. But the time to start planting the seed is now. I would doubt that with the economic crisis we are facing now, people have their mind is not about traveling right now. They have to start thinking, I may lose my job. There's so much uncertainty in the air. Jobs are not there. And everybody knows things are not the same as we saw it in January. So tourism thrives in an environment where there's money, disposable income, there's a confidence in the market. Those aspects are not there. So domestic tourism, yes, it's a good solution, but this is a long-term process, but worth starting out.
Thank you, Dr. Nibigira. So there's a question here from Benson Githaiga, who's asking, being on the front line, do you think that destination and experience platforms like TripAdvisor, Booking.com have adequately adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic adequately?
Thank you so much. Maybe to clarify, TripAdvisor, Booking.com, and LastMinute.com, Wakanow.com, they don't own a single hotel. They don't own a single product. So the role is not for them to sell what they don't produce. So the ball is in the hands of those who are producing the experience. So Booking.com only advertise what you give them. They will put Radisson Upper Hill. They will put Crown Plaza. They will put a hotel, Hemingway's. The product they offer on their platforms are in the hands of those who are producing the product. So I'll say the role of transformation has to take place in the space of those who control the product. That's where transformation has to take place. Who's designing the new set of products Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania has to put on the market? Is it about the Masai Mara experience as we knew it before COVID-19? Or there's a new product on the market? Or are they redesigning the way we consume those products? So lastminute.com, booking.com, it's almost like Airbnb. It's a platform where you sell, it's a market. But the market cannot sell what the producer has not really changed, adapted to meet the market need and demand and expectations. I will probably say that the role of lastminute.com is to continue evolving and then look for new products, new solutions, new experiences we need to see on their platform.
Thanks, Carmen. So Warren Buffett, also known as the Oracle of Omaha, sold all his airline stock and said that the business was not good for at least 2 years out, and it was going to be very tough. So he did what every smart business person does. David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, also said that I think sometime in May that maybe those who've invested heavily in tourism and hospitality should consider going into manufacturing to provide the goods and services that perhaps needed to deal with the pandemic. These two very influential global leaders are suggesting that tourism and travel and hospitality as we know it is perhaps changing for a very, very long time. And you've just been talking about, how do we reimagine? how do you recreate tourism in the COVID regime? Something that is consistent with the context, the global context of travel, safety, health, and all of that. What would you say might be a possible path for us to reimagine tourism? What might it look like when we ease down travel restrictions, get some mobility? Might some of the familiar elements of tourism and travel, like mass travel, like the white sands and the hundreds, nearly maybe even thousands of people who can flock in there at one given time, are we going to go into more kind of niche, more restricted, exclusive travel experiences with fewer people, smaller restaurants, maybe not even restaurants, more room service? What is your thinking about what might emerge as travel and hospitality in the COVID era?
Thank you so much, Alex. I personally, I think we are not going to stop to discover places. It's in our DNA. We are human beings. We are social creatures. We will be driven by curiosity. And in the era of social media, we are flooded by so much information that it triggers our brain to seek experiences. So first of all, I'd like to say that we needed to move away from just the sake of traveling. People are now seeking experiences. So if you seek an experience, it's no longer about just going to Kenya. It's about going to Kenya to seek an experience. And the future of tourism, whether it takes place in the next 2 to 3 years, the recovery process, it will have to be in the hands of those who are designing new products, taking into account that we cannot be, as consumers, as travelers, be taken for granted. That's the number one. We can no longer, as the practitioners, the people from the industry, offer the same menu at the same price and expect the market to take it as it is and say, we are good, we are going to do business with you. Second, at the policy level, destinations in the space of, I'll say, the East African community, we saw how we need each other more than ever. So decisions you make in Nairobi as an operator of a small restaurant or guest house will have an impact on someone who's in Samburu or in a remote area, because tourism has demonstrated that there's not the poor and the rich. Everyone is connected to the tourism sector. If you don't offer healthcare, good insurance cover to your staff, then anytime there's going to be a pandemic, then they're going to be in the space of tourism and travel. Everybody's going to stay. So what we need to think about in terms of the future is that whether it's travel, hospitality, tourism, any sector around those 3 pillars have to be completely changed and then reflect the needs of us as consumers. Because we took time to redesign our products, thinking everybody wants the same, but we realized they don't want the same. And the experience is going to be costly, maybe a little bit higher. And there are people who are going to be willing to pay because the cost of suffering in quarantine and dying of a virus or disease is, they can't take that risk. So some destinations are going to have to pivot completely toward a niche tourism destination, but that requires an investment and a deliberate decision as a government. I would doubt that we are going to see the decline of mass tourism, because as destinations all over the world, they go through an evolution. They may start from mass tourism and then gradually transition to niche tourism. So we're going to have pockets of destinations in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe going for niche tourism. Other destinations will pursue the cheap routes of mass tourism, and then they will change gradually. But even in the mass philosophy of tourism, they will have to think about health, security, and how do you support a sector, not only because you want more money and more tourists, but how do you distribute that to avoid more consequences? Because business doesn't work, then we have seen layoff, people lose jobs, loss of income, and then the whole community supported by tourism brings other issues of poaching, name it. So we have seen how when we have a fragile destination which has the wrong tourism model, what will be the consequences? So coming back to what Warren Buffett, I think he's a very, I'm not a financial person. I don't really know much about how he does invest in different portfolios. But definitely the aviation sector is suffering. All those expensive leased aircrafts on the ground, they are not flying. That's a huge hemorrhage. It's a lot of loss for national carriers. I think if you look at Kenya Airways, already in trouble before COVID-19, I can't even think what will be in the books now. However, we need to also understand what the government do in terms of financial stimulus. You know, what are the fiscal and monetary packages they put in place? Because if you put tourism as your number one priority, then you're going to put all the arsenal you have and all the means to revive the industry. But you have to know what you want to do right now. I think this is the perfect moment to reset the button, to take a new direction, and to indicate and signal to your markets, your source market and your partners in the future, where you stand and what you need from now.
So a follow-up question. You're right at the heart of Kigali, and the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting 2020 was supposed to happen in Kigali in June, actually. Is it June or July? So that's now been postponed or cancelled, whatever it is, owing to COVID-19. And you and I know that the Rwandan government has invested heavily in hospitality. The Kigali Convention Center is created around the apex of travel and conference experience. Of course, selling Rwanda as a destination, as a concept, as an experience. We've seen other countries make those kinds of investments to Botswana, for instance, Malaysia. So my question is the role of the public sector in supporting the recovery of the tourism sector. Are we doing enough from a policy perspective? Where is the opportunity for governments to come out in a much more active role to support tourism, even though in places like Kenya, it's solely in the hands of private sector, but as you know, they've been pummeled by COVID, they've lost all the revenue, hotels are closing here every other day, people are getting fired, we're not even sure whether they're ready to recover. But do you think there's a role for the public sector to at least put a floor beneath which the sector shouldn't collapse, and basically enable some critical capacities to be preserved during this downtime? So when things are ready to reopen, we are ready to actually start to compete in a reasonable fashion.
I'm glad you brought that question, Alex, because you are rightly so saying that tourism really needs to be supported by the public sector. Our governments, if you look at most of our government agenda, tourism is at the heart of what they say is a priority. But if you try to dig deeper, you realize that tourism is always the one sector which is always given less in terms of budget allocation. And second, it's taken for granted. As governments now, they begin to understand that unlike other business sectors, tourism revenue they count on so much is permanently lost because of pandemics like COVID-19, unsolved capacities, for instance, in accommodation. You cannot generate revenue when hotels are closed. You cannot create jobs when hotels and parks, national parks, protected areas, and small businesses are closed. So we cannot really say that the government can be left out in the whole solution. They should be really the pillar of the recovery. If really tourism is important to the industry, to their sector, to their development plans and everything they do, they need to rally the troops, whether it's the donors community, the private sector, and say, we need to think how we can come up with solutions which are for long-term and sustainable. Second, I will say that in the East African community, we don't even have a choice, because our tourism sector, whether you are an operator operating in Kenya, today you really much depend on maybe another business operator in other region or other country in the East African community for you to thrive. So we needed to elevate the conversation from a national crisis to a regional crisis. An operator in Uganda selling the gorilla permit to the gorilla experience in Uganda may rely on a transport partner moving passengers from the international airport of Rwanda to the border of Uganda. So the interconnectivity and over-reliances of our connected systems does not leave rooms for government to say, it's not our business. Actually, the recovery will be faster if they take tourism as a serious sector, because it's in every sector, from food product, education, agriculture, name it, tourism is everywhere. So if you really want to see a smooth and fast recovery, government have to step in, and then step in with the forces they can have, and then make an agenda that this will be something they will back up and then support.
So a follow-up question on that is, how would governments pick who they fund? Say, for instance, you set up a tourism fund, for instance, a tourism protection fund or hospitality protection fund. How would you pick the winners and how would you pick the losers? Would you give money and would you not give money?
I think we have to use, sorry. I think, Alex, the way we used to pick the losers and winners, those who get the favors, it's going to be interesting to watch. First of all, the losers are going to be many. There are many businesses which, without anything, they will have to die because they were using the wrong business model. So I think for government, it's not just about supporting one business. It's rather supporting a cluster of businesses by allowing them to go through processes of giving them incentives. And then you have to look at how sustainable are they. I would like maybe to challenge some businesses in Rwanda, in Kenya, in any East African destination and say, do we need to support only businesses because they say they bring tourism in the country, the more numbers they bring? Or do we need also now to start questioning, what are the benefits of Kenyans? Can you, as a business operating in Kenya, demonstrate that your welfare system has a safety net, that once the business closes for 6 months, your people you employ are not going to be laid off and then be left in dire poverty? So resilience, agility, and every aspect of tourism, we needed to think about that again. The skills that we need tomorrow. As a government, I think we needed to have people who are in tourism, who can be agile. Today, you may work as a tour operator, and then you are in the business of tour operating, and then that's what you do. But let's say for 6 or 9 months of the year, the business closes, and that's the only set of skills you have. How can we continue to have that conversation? Government have to make the tough choices, and sometimes not popular choices, but they cannot allow the industry to collapse. So the losers will have to be left, because not everybody has to be rescued, but the good business models embedded and funded around sustainable development goals, looking at the impact of climate change, looking at how people are thriving in the industry, not just because you make profits. I think that's where the incentives should come from the government, be directed to. Last, but also equally important, we as East Africans, we should advocate for tourism, but advocate for tourism and say, government of Rwanda or Kenya or Tanzania, or whatever, that tourism should not only be about tourists. For instance, we build good roads, and the good roads will only go to the gates of the best gated 5-star hotel. But we don't have good schools. But they'll tell us that tourism will develop our economies and our communities. We may have good infrastructure, but for the benefit of whom? So we take from the tourists to give to the poor. So the government now have to reconcile the two and say, we need to connect the dots. Citizens of East Africans, Kenya, Rwandan, Burundian, Ugandan, Rwandans, all of us, we need to see tourism working for us, not against us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just the last question before we wind it up. There's a comment here from Laban Cliff, who says that Airbnb actually recorded an increase in demand for out-of-town stroke cities destinations. Perhaps in the view of COVID, tourists are keen on the outskirts for their relaxation. This is, of course, on the back of numerous cancellations and all that. So he's asking, could this mean better days for boutique tourism? Maybe he means local tourism, facilities in East Africa and beyond. Could this just be a new lease of life for domestic tourism?
Thank you. I think we know that the sharing economy based on what Airbnb does has taken some time to be absorbed and then accepted in some destinations, but I think that's not the case in Kenya. However, I would like to say, I'm just maybe giving kind of like simulations. I personally myself, as a very avid traveler, my work is about traveling, so that's I travel a lot. I may reconsider staying in a 5-star hotel with, let's say, 500 bedrooms in the future. That's my personal choice. Maybe I'll feel confident in a space of maybe Airbnb or a small guest house, because the fear of crowds, many people, and it's not just about Airbnb. It's also about my sector, conferences, events. Now that we are doing webinars, do I need to travel to Nairobi to attend the next big events at your big conference centers you have? I doubt. Now that we have seen so many solutions available, and then I think this is the space for small and medium enterprises to thrive, to offer an alternative business proposal on the table, and then bank on the fact that we still have fear of crowds. We still believe that maybe a space where there are less than 10 people, that crowd can be controlled, you can clean smoothly. But at the same time, remember that the big international hotel chains, they have the muscles to put all the means they have to put safety and security of their guests as their #1 priority. So I'll say that from an East African perspective, we are going to see the big hotels continue to do business. But I think also the small businesses will have to think about how they market themselves. Work on your safety measures and security, and then convey a message of how you have changed your standard procedures and the operations in your own hotel. Then demonstrate that your food has, the lowest carbon footprint, that you work with the community. Maybe the story and the narrative, the storytelling of how we consume the experience has to change. I don't think it's sexy anymore to say to people that our conference attracts 5,000 participants. That will scare everybody. I think I will not attend such conference. It's no longer sexy to say that your destination at the beach in Mombasa, we have on one Saturday, on a sunny Saturday, we have 10,000 people at that gathering or venue. People will say that's not my kind of place. So maybe exclusive, small and medium businesses are going to find their ways, but they need to communicate, they need to package, they need to find their niche market. And then I think COVID-19 has exactly provided that avenue for them.
Okay, Carmen, we have to draw this to a close. Thank you so much. This has been a very engaging, a very stimulating conversation. I think you've opened up really interesting questions for further conversation. What is interesting about the sector we're talking about is that it is also the mechanism by which the pandemic spread across the globe. If you look at the global travel hubs from China to Turkey to Italy to Spain to New York to Seattle, here in Kenya it came through Nairobi, and in South Africa it came through Johannesburg and all these big airports, in Kinshasa, for instance, in Cairo. So there's a very strong link between the disease pandemics, the potential, the risk of disease pandemics and tourism. What is also interesting, as you said, is that our systems are breathing. A bunch of British ecologists have now created a term called the anthropos, which is very different from Paul Crutzen's Anthropocene, which imagined human beings having the power of hurricanes and volcanoes and glaciers and all of that. So there is some breathing space that is being provided for natural systems to recover. Tourism, in many ways, has an ecological footprint that is not so desirable. Pollution from aviation, from the aviation sector, and all the sectors in the value and supply chain in aid of tourism. So we're going to have a lot to think about, and I think one of your other really critical points is, can we start to re-examine and question the real contribution of tourism to our economies? You give a very good example of paved roads, beautiful roads leading to plush hotels, five-star hotels, whatever number of stars we may assign these places, and yet we have no schools, we have no running water, in our neighborhoods. Some of the people who work in these expensive hotels go home to houses that are unlit, do not have electricity, they do not have indoor plumbing, they're unsafe, they don't have access to medical health and all of that. So even in reimagining tourism and the role of the public sector, can we start to ask those questions? What is your real value add to society before we put public dollars to support your business? Did you preserve jobs during the pandemic, or you laid off everyone like every possibly smart businessman might do? Are you just extractive of value out of society and all of that? So we are the better for having this conversation with you, and we thank you so much. We've really enjoyed this conversation, and we look forward to engaging with you in the months to come.